Welcome to the Vermont Agency of Agriculture's Pesticide Safety Education video for pesticide dealers. This video is to help you prepare to take the Vermont Pesticide Dealer exam. You can also use this video to provide a review of pesticide safety for those working in a retail setting. Before we learn about pesticides, we must begin by talking about some key terms. First is, what is a pest? A pest is any living thing that has an undesirable impact on something that is important to us. Many people think pests are only insects, which is not correct. Pests can be any living thing, such as an insect, an animal, fungi or bacteria, or a plant, also known as weeds. Next, we need to know what a pesticide is. A pesticide is any substance or mixture of substances to kill, control, or repel a pest. Remember, these substances are being used to control another living thing, which means all pesticides, including natural and organic ones, pose some type of risk. Another misconception is that a pesticide is used only to control insects. This is not the case. A pesticide is a broader term, and there are specific types of pesticides. There are many types of pesticides, like insecticides, which are used to control insects. Insecticides can be broad spectrum, meaning they will control a wide variety of insects, or they can be narrow spectrum, meaning they will control more specific insects. They can provide short-term control, which means they won't control any insects after the spraying is done. Or they can provide residual control, which means the insecticide provides control for a period of time after the spraying is complete. Other pesticide types are miticides, used to control mites, such as ticks, acaricides, used to control spiders, and fungicides, used to control fungi, such as mold or fungi that cause plant diseases. Another pesticide type are herbicides that control undesirable plants, most commonly known as weeds. Many people do not realize that an herbicide is a pesticide. Herbicides can be selective, which means they control either broadleaf plants or grasses. Weed and feeds are an example of a selective herbicide that also contains a fertilizer. Non-selective herbicides are ones that will control all plants. An example of a non-selective herbicide is glyphosate, commonly known as Roundup. In addition, other common pesticide types are rodenticides, usually in the form of rodent baits, and repellents to repel insects, deer, snakes, or other animals. Herbicides, fungicides, and insecticides all can be systemic, which means the pesticide is absorbed by and transported through a plant, rendering some or all of the plant toxic to the pests that feed on the plant's tissue. Besides the many types of pesticides, pesticides come in many forms, which is called the pesticide formulation. The formulation is the physical form that the pesticide comes in and is made up of the pesticide's active ingredients plus the inert ingredients. The inert ingredients may also be called inactive ingredients or other ingredients. There are a wide variety of pesticide formulations. Some are meant to be applied in the form they come in and do not need to be mixed with a carrier like water. These are known as ready to use. Examples of these are dusts, granules, baits, pellets, aerosols, and ready to use liquids. Some formulations are meant to be mixed, usually with water, before they can be used. Some examples of these are concentrated solutions, wettable powders, or water-soluble powders. There are pros and cons to the different pesticide formulations, and some may be better to use in different situations. Dusts leave a white residue behind, which may be undesirable, so you'll want to choose a formulation that does not leave a residue. Some formulations, like wettable powders, require constant agitation of the spray tank to keep the pesticide in solution. Your spray equipment may not have the ability to agitate, so you'll want to choose a formulation that does not require agitation. Or some formulations may require the user to wear certain personal protective equipment or PPE that another formulation does not. For example, a pesticide formulation may require the user to wear chemical-resistant gloves, but you don't own any of those gloves, so you would choose another formulation that requires you to wear PPE that you already have. Something similar to a pesticide is a pest control device. These devices are a mechanical instrument intended to trap, destroy, repel, or mitigate a pest. Examples of devices are mousetraps, lights that attract pests, or devices that emit a sound to repel a pest. While these devices are used to destroy, repel, or mitigate a pest, they are not a substance or mixture of substances and therefore not a pesticide. When it comes to applying pesticides, an important piece of information to know is what site will it be applied to? The site is the entity to which a pesticide is or could be applied to as listed on the pesticide label. When looking at the label, the site may not necessarily be a location. For example, the pesticide application you wish to make is to your backyard. The location of the application is the backyard, but the site of application would be the turf. In Vermont, the site of application must be on the pesticide label of the pesticide you are using. If you are using a pesticide on a site that is not listed on the pesticide label, that is considered a pesticide misuse. Reading the pesticide label is one of the most important aspects of using a pesticide. The pesticide label provides critical information about how to handle and safely use the pesticide product and avoid harm to human health and the environment. This information is printed on or attached to the pesticide container at the time of purchase. Labeling includes the label itself, plus all other information you receive from the manufacturer about the product when you buy it. The labeling may include brochures, leaflets, and other information that accompanies the pesticide product. It is very important that one reads and follows the pesticide label. Now, why is it important to read and follow the pesticide label? First of all, the pesticide label is federal law, and using a pesticide in a way that does not follow the label can result in a violation. Following the label isn't only about being in compliance with the law, it is about using the pesticide in a manner that will minimize risk to the user and the environment. There are many important bits of information on the pesticide label, like mixing and application rates, what personal protective equipment one must wear while using the pesticide, storage and disposal instructions, first aid, and any possible environmental concerns. Some more important information on the pesticide label is where you can use the pesticide, which is known as the site of application. As mentioned before, in Vermont, the site of application must be on the label. If you use a pesticide on a site that is not listed on the label, it is a pesticide misuse. In Vermont, if the site of application is on the label, but the pest is not on the label, it is still okay to use the pesticide. It is also okay to use a pesticide at a rate lower than what is listed on the label, but it is never okay to use a rate higher than what is listed on the pesticide label. The pesticide label will also provide information if the pesticide is potentially toxic to bees. Be sure to check the label before any pesticide use. If it is toxic to bees, it will provide a warning as such. If the pesticide is toxic to bees, you can help protect bees by not using the pesticide on flowering plants, since the bees may be foraging on the flowers. And also you can use the pesticide after the sun goes down, which is when bees are less active. On every label is a signal word, and this signal word tells you what the relative acute toxicity of the pesticide is. The signal words you'll see on a pesticide label are caution, warning, or danger. Danger indicates that the pesticide has a higher acute toxicity and will pose a greater risk to use. Caution indicates that the pesticide has a low acute toxicity and will pose less risk to use. The signal word of warning is in the middle of danger and caution and indicates the pesticide has a moderate acute toxicity and a moderate risk to use. The signal words will also indicate to you if the pesticide will require the user to wear more personal protective equipment. Pesticides with the signal words of warning and danger will likely require the user to wear more PPE than one with the signal word of caution. Because the pesticide label is so important, Vermont requires that a legible label must be maintained on all pesticide containers at all times. Check the pesticides you have for sale and pay attention to packages that are older or have been exposed to weather to see that the labels are still legible. When it comes to pesticide use, one should use pesticides wisely and not overuse them. Pesticides are just one option in the pest control toolbox. Also in that toolbox are other options and techniques available that can help manage a pest population and minimize adverse effects. This pest control toolbox is called Integrated Pest Management, or IPM. With IPM, pesticides are used as a last resort, and the situation should be assessed to see if other control strategies can be used first. The first step of IPM is to identify the pest. What is the pest? Is it an insect, a mite, a disease caused by a fungus, or a bacteria? Is it causing harm to the site? This will determine if control is necessary. After you've identified the pest and determined that control is needed, an option available to you may be using a type of mechanical control. Mechanical control is taking physical measures to trap a pest species, exclude them from the area, or eliminate them. An example is using a trap, like a rodent trap, for mice, or simply using methods like handpicking or netting. Another option available in IPM is to use biological controls. Biological controls use or encourage the population of predators, parasites, or diseases to control the pest. An example of a biological control are using ladybugs that eat other insect pests like aphids. Another IPM tool available is cultural control, which is using management strategies to minimize the impact of the pest. An example of this is rotating crops, or planting a crop in a new area to avoid last year's disease. In addition to crop rotation, planting resistant plant varieties is another example of cultural control in IPM. These varieties are more likely to resist certain pest problems and therefore need less pesticide use to control their pests. Another example of mechanical control is exclusion, where you use methods to keep or exclude a pest from an area, like blocking a hole where a rodent may be able to enter a building. And another example of cultural control is sanitation, which involves eliminating food, water, shelter, or other necessities important to the pest's survival. An example of this is cleaning up diseased plant material or removing weeds that can harbor insect or rodent pests. If after trying different non-chemical IPM controls and the pest problem has not been addressed, then using a pesticide to control the pest is the IPM tool you'll reach for last. When using a pesticide, try to only spot treat when possible and choose the least toxic option possible. Remember, a signal word of caution on the pesticide label indicates a lower toxicity for a pesticide. When using pesticides as part of an IPM program, it is important to spray only when needed and not according to a schedule. Spraying by schedule may mean spraying when the pest isn't present or it is present at a life stage where it is not vulnerable to control, which leads to more pesticide use than needed. Step 1 of an IPM program, identifying the pest, will provide you with the information about which life stage the pest is in to help you determine if it is in a stage of its life cycle where it is vulnerable to control. Remember, all pesticides pose some risk, and a good IPM program will help reduce that risk. Pesticides are highly regulated at both the federal and state level. At the federal level, pesticides are regulated by the United States Environmental Protection Agency, or EPA. At the state level in Vermont, pesticides are regulated by the Vermont Agency of Agriculture, Food, and Market. The U.S. EPA's pesticide regulations are called the Federal Insecticide and Rodenticide Act, or FIFRA. FIFRA sets the basis of all pesticide regulation in the United States. While FIFRA covers many things about pesticide regulation, one thing it covers is that almost all pesticides must be registered with EPA. You know a pesticide is registered by the EPA because it will have an EPA registration number on the pesticide label. EPA also has a category of pesticides called 25B minimum risk pesticides. While 25B products are still pesticides, EPA does not require them to be registered, and therefore the 25B pesticides will not have an EPA registration number, but they must follow specific rules to be labeled as a 25B pesticide. FIFRA lays out the baseline requirements for pesticide programs nationwide. FIFRA also gives states the authority to develop their own regulations and implement their state pesticide programs. In Vermont, the Vermont Agency of Agriculture's Vermont Rule for Control of Pesticides is the baseline for Vermont's pesticide program. The Vermont Rule gives the Secretary of Agriculture authority to regulate pesticide use, registration, sales, storage, and pesticide disposal in Vermont. As a pesticide dealer in Vermont, you should be familiar with the Vermont Pesticide Rule. You can't be in compliance with the law if you don't know what the law says. If there's something you don't understand, call the Vermont Agency of Agriculture. The Vermont Rule for the Control of Pesticides says that all pesticides sold in Vermont must be registered with the state, including the 25B minimum risk pesticides. The Vermont Rule for Control of Pesticides also provides authority to the Vermont Agency of Agriculture so that it can issue penalties, which can include a monetary fine, for violating the Vermont Pesticide Rule. The Vermont Rule for Control of Pesticides provides the rules for licensed pesticide dealers. These rules state that a licensed dealer must notify the Vermont Agency of Agriculture of a change of employment, including transferring to another store within 30 days of this change. The pesticide dealer license is also renewed every year at the end of the year. As long as you are employed full-time at a retail store and your license is renewed annually, you can keep your Vermont pesticide dealer license year after year. As a licensed dealer, you are responsible for checking the pesticides available for sale in your store. Check the sales areas for any pesticide spills or leaks. Any pesticide that has spilled or leaked is a potential danger to customers, which is why it is important to check the sales areas often. If you see a pesticide that has spilled, clean it up promptly and dispose of it properly. Pesticides, like weed and feed bags, can be easily ripped or torn, causing the contents to leak out of the bag. What you see here in this picture is a common occurrence. If you see this, take measures to contain the spill, like taping the punctured bag shut, or putting the ripped bag in another container or bag to contain the spill, and then clean up the spill so customers do not contact the spilled pesticide. When you're checking the sales area or when cleaning up a spill, don't forget to look in between the pallets, where spilled pesticide might go unnoticed. If the pesticides are displayed in a pallet box, be sure to also check inside the box for any spills. At first glance, These pesticide containers in this photo look fine, but if you look closely, you'll notice that one of these packages has a tear. When checking the pesticide retail areas, keep your eyes peeled and inspect closely. By checking the sales areas often and keeping a keen eye out, you'll hopefully notice a tear in a bag caused by something like the forks from a forklift puncturing a bag. There are other things to consider when checking the pesticide retail areas of your store, like seen here in this photo of these pesticides being stored outside in front of the store. These bags of mulch with weed control appear to be fine. They aren't leaking and the packaging is in good condition. But let's take a closer look. Another thing to check is the pesticide label. Skim the labels of the products in your store, especially the storage and disposal sections of the label. Taking a closer look at this pesticide label storage and disposal section, you will see that it says to store this product in its original container in a cool, dry, locked place out of the reach of children and animals. These pesticides were being stored in a place that was not in a locked area out in front of the store, and they were in an area that could be exposed to rain, which is an improper way to store this product. Let's look at another example. These pesticide containers are in good condition, being stored under cover in an outdoor retail area. Now let's look at the label of this pesticide and see what the storage and disposal section says. Reading the label of this pesticide, we see that it says to store the product in the original container in a safe place. Protect container from freezing. This pesticide was being displayed for sale in an outdoor area, which means it is an unheated space. During the summer, when there's no threat of freezing temperatures, this is fine. But once the weather starts getting cold, pesticides like this will need to be moved to a space that is heated to keep it from freezing. It is common to see this storage requirement on the label of liquid pesticides. If you remain vigilant and check your pesticide retail areas often and familiarize yourself with the pesticide labels, this will help avoid any potential violations of the Vermont pesticide rule. As a licensed dealer, your customers may come to you with questions about pesticides and ask for recommendations. Please keep in mind that you can only recommend pesticide use by customers when climatic, pest, and other conditions are proper for controlling that pest. It is important for you to know how Vermont classifies pesticides. In the Vermont pesticide rule, pesticides are classified as class A, B, or C. Class A pesticides are restricted use pesticides, which includes both federally and state restricted pesticides. A federal restricted use pesticide clearly says restricted use pesticide on the front of the label. Vermont does restrict some pesticides that the federal government does not. This means that a pesticide may be state restricted, but not federally restricted. These state restricted pesticides will not have the restricted use statement on the label, and the only way to check if a pesticide is state restricted is to look up the pesticide on the Vermont Agency of Agriculture's online pesticide search. Class A pesticides can only be sold to certified pesticide applicators. Vermont has two types of general use pesticides. One of them is Class B pesticides, which are general use, controlled sale pesticides. These pesticides are not marketed as ready to use and tend to have higher concentrations of active ingredients. Some examples are concentrated pesticides that must be mixed with water before they can be used. Class B pesticides also include all turf products like weed and feeds. The other general use pesticide in Vermont is a Class C pesticide, which are homeowner pesticides. These products are used in and around the home and marketed as ready to use and typically have less than 3% active ingredients. An example of a Class C pesticide is a wasp and hornet spray. There are some exceptions to the 3% rule for active ingredients. These exceptions are allowed to have an unlimited percent of active ingredients and include pesticides like pet supplies, repellents, disinfectants, pool products, plus several others. To obtain your pesticide dealer license, you may have to take and pass the Vermont Pesticide Dealer exam. The A and B dealer licenses both require passing an exam. A Class C dealer does not require an exam to obtain the license. A Class A dealer license allows one to sell Class A, B, and C pesticides. A Class B dealer license allows one to sell Class B and C pesticides, and a Class C dealer license allows one to sell only Class C pesticides. The Vermont pesticide dealer licenses are issued by the Vermont Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets and can be obtained by a full-time employee. Vermont considers a full-time employee as someone who works 32 hours per week on a year-round basis. Class A pesticides can only be purchased and used by certified applicators, which means that a Class A dealer can only sell Class A pesticides to certified applicators. As a Class A dealer, all Class A pesticides must be stored behind a sales counter where the customer cannot serve themselves. In addition, a Class A dealer must keep records about the Class A pesticides they sell and report those sales annually to the Vermont Agency of Agriculture. The Vermont Rule for Control of Pesticides lists some standards of operation. One of those standards says that all pesticide use must be consistent with their labeling. Remember, the pesticide label is the law, and one must read and follow the label. It is illegal to use a rate or frequency that is more than what is listed on the pesticide label, but it is okay to use a pesticide at a rate or frequency that is less than specified on the pesticide label. All pesticides, including organic and natural pesticides, pose some risk to use. To determine how risky a pesticide is, it is good to know about the toxicity of a pesticide exposure. There are two types of pesticide exposure. The first is acute exposure, which is a single dose where the effects from that exposure are seen within 24 hours. The second is chronic exposure, which is exposure to a pesticide over a long period of time or repeated exposure. When assessing the toxicity of a pesticide, it is helpful to know the pesticide's LD50 value. The LD50 means lethal dose 50%, which is the lethal dose to kill 50% of a test population. A lower LD50 value is more toxic. The examples listed here, the 1,000 milligrams per kilogram of body weight, LD50 is less toxic than the 200 milligrams per kilogram of body weight, LD50. When evaluating the risk of a pesticide, we look at the risk equation, which says that risk equals toxicity times exposure. The pesticide's toxicity is something that cannot be changed, but you can choose a pesticide that has a lower toxicity to lower your risk. You can also lower the risk of using a pesticide by limiting your exposure, which may include things like wearing PPE. To limit your exposure, it is important to know the most common routes of pesticide exposure. The most common route of pesticide exposure is dermal, or through your skin. The second most common route of pesticide exposure is through inhalation, or breathing it in. Since the most common route of exposure is through your skin, to lower your risk, you can mitigate the exposure by wearing proper PPE that covers your skin. And be sure to read the label and wear the PPE that the label requires. The greatest pesticide exposure risk is during mixing and loading pesticide concentrates. These concentrates are not diluted until the user dilutes them, making them more hazardous. Some pesticides require the user to wear more PPE for mixing and loading and less PPE for pesticide application. Again, read the label carefully to check the PPE requirements of the pesticide. When storing pesticides, besides reading and following the label, there are some good practices to follow. Store herbicides apart from other pesticides, fertilizers, and seeds to avoid cross-contamination. Flammable pesticides should be stored separately, preferably in a fireproof cabinet away from non-flammable pesticides. Store liquid formulations below dry formulations. This is done in case of a spill or leak. If a liquid container is stored above a dry pesticide formulation and the liquid leaks, it can leak onto the dry product and contaminate it, creating a bigger hazard to deal with. And never store pesticides with food, feed, seeds, or veterinary supplies. In Vermont, we consider a pesticide accident or spill as any release of a pesticide or pesticide mix from its container or application equipment which is contrary to label instructions or which violate the pesticide rule. If you have a pesticide spill in your store, you will want to take immediate actions to protect human health and the environment. When dealing with a spill, it is good to remember the 3 C's: control, contain, and clean. The first, control, means to keep the spill from spreading and minimize the contaminated area. This can be done simply by writing a tipped-over container. The next step is to control the spill, such as sealing a tear in a bagged product with tape or creating a barrier around a spill to keep a liquid spill from spreading. And the last step with a pesticide spill is to clean it up. You may need to use absorbent materials to soak liquid spills or a broom to sweep up dry spills. It is important that you do not use a hose to wash the spill away. This only makes the spill bigger and creates a larger spill to clean up. Since a pesticide spill can be a common occurrence in a retail store, it is best to be prepared by having a written plan outlining steps to take in the event of a spill and to have a spill kit handy. If you wish to assemble a spill kit, here is a list of items that you may want to put in your spill kit. Items like a broom and dustpan and shovels should be marked as pesticide use only. In Vermont, all pesticide spills must be reported. During normal business hours on the weekdays, the spill can be reported to the Vermont Agency of Agriculture. During evenings and weekends, spills can be reported to the Department of Public Safety. After cleaning up a spill, you may have waste pesticides that need to be disposed of correctly. Take any surplus or waste pesticides to pesticide drop-off sites, sponsored by Vermont Solid Waste Districts. It is important to dispose of these wastes correctly, since improper disposal can lead to environmental contamination. If you have any empty pesticide containers, the containers must be handled correctly. Empty bagged pesticide containers should be completely emptied and both ends of the bag cut open. For non-paper pesticide containers, like plastic containers, they must be triple rinsed and punctured. Once they are properly triple rinsed and punctured, they can be disposed of in the trash. Do not reuse these containers. In Vermont, it is also illegal to burn and bury these containers. Throughout this video, I've mentioned many times that one must read and follow the pesticide label. Now, let's look more closely at a pesticide label. Many of you are likely familiar with brand or trade names. Some brand or trade names of common household products are Advil, Band-Aid, or Kleenex. a brand or trade name of a commonly known pesticide is Roundup. For the label we see here on the screen, the brand or trade name of this product is Preen. We can also determine the type of pesticide this product is from the front panel of this label. We can see that this pesticide is a weed preventer, and since we know that a weed is an undesirable plant pest, we know that the type of pesticide this product is an herbicide. The pesticide label will also have an active ingredient statement, which lists what percent of active ingredients are in the product, as well as the percent that is inert ingredients. On this label, the inert ingredients are listed as other ingredients. In this section is where you will find the common name or names of the product. If we think back to the brand names mentioned in the previous slide, Advil, Band-Aid, and Kleenex, they all have common names. The common name of Advil is ibuprofen. For Band-Aid, it is bandage, and the common name for Kleenex is tissue. For the pesticide Roundup, the common name of that is glyphosate. For this product with a brand name of Preen, its common names are trifluralin and isoxaben. The label will also have the signal word, which on this label is caution, indicating a lower toxicity. And all pesticide labels will bear the statement, keep out of reach of children. On every pesticide label, you will find a first aid section that directs you what to do if the pesticide gets on your skin, in your eyes, you breathe it in, or swallow it. If someone needs medical attention after pesticide exposure, it is important to bring the label with you. You will also find precautionary statements on a pesticide label. These are important to read and be familiar with while using the pesticide. As you can see in this product, it warns against eye irritation and being harmful if swallowed or inhaled. In this section, this label also lists the PPE the user is required to wear when using this pesticide. It is also good to know that on this label, it also mentions that this product is not for use on lawns or vegetable gardens. Take the time to read the label thoroughly before using the product to be familiar with these precautions. Some more information that you will find on a pesticide label is the EPA registration number. This number is a unique identifying number that shows that the pesticide is registered with the United States EPA. The EPA registration number will never contain letters, only numbers. You'll also find the EPA establishment number, which indicates where the pesticide was packaged for final sale. The EPA establishment number will contain letters and numbers. The pesticide label may have an environmental hazard section where it may warn the user of a variety of potential environmental hazards to be aware of. Some examples, like seen here on this label, is that the pesticide is toxic to freshwater, marine, and aquatic life, that the product is toxic to plants, and to be careful around surface water in areas where it could impact groundwater. It is in this section you would find if the pesticide is toxic to bees. Every label will also have directions for use, which will provide a variety of information, such as when to apply, how to apply, and mixing and application rates. This section may also list more precautions or even entry restrictions. As you can see, the pesticide label contains a lot of very important information, and following the label is crucial in using pesticides in a manner that minimizes risk as much as possible. If you are using this video to help you prepare to take the Vermont Pesticide A or B dealer exam, this is information you need to know about the exam. The exams are all closed book. With the exception of a calculator, you are not allowed to view any devices, like a cell phone, while taking the exam. You need a score of 75% or higher to pass the exam. The first time you take the exam in person, it is free. If you fail the first attempt, you must wait 7 days before you can take the exam for a second time. If you fail the second time, you must wait 28 days from the initial test date to take the exam for a third time. If you fail for a third time, you must wait a year to take the exam again. To retake the exam, there is a retake fee. Once you pass and pay the dealer license fee, that means you are now a licensed pesticide dealer in Vermont. The licenses are renewed every year at the end of the year. You can keep renewing your dealer license as long as you remain employed full-time at a retail store. We thank you for watching and hope you found this video helpful. If you have any questions, please do not hesitate to reach out to the Vermont Agency of Agriculture by calling or emailing.